A wave of disappointment and betrayal crashed over his life when he discovered his wife's infidelity with their neighbor. However, when anger turned into a desire for revenge, he entered a game where the stakes were high, not only the fate of his own marriage, but also his freedom. From hidden intrigues to unexpected twists of fate, this is the story of how he faced betrayal, imprisonment, and finally managed to start afresh. I was teased first at school, then in college, and then at work. I was the laughingstock of everyone around me. But the only one who always supported me, and the greatest achievement in my life, was my wife. She was like a savior, an angel. When I returned home, I forgot about all the bad things and just enjoyed myself. But alas, she turned away from me like everyone else and faced terrible consequences. I'm Jerry Watts, and in every aspect, I'm just an average guy, perhaps a bit on the shorter and skinnier side. My unwritten rule throughout life has been to avoid making waves, resulting in a quiet and unremarkable existence. Despite not earning a substantial income, I managed to live comfortably with a decent job, even if it didn't make headlines at parties. I've had several relationships and married Marilyn, who made me feel special. While I may not follow a live and let live philosophy, winning the championship of marrying Marilyn felt like a significant achievement. However, my low-key nature doesn't equate to being easygoing, contrary to what others seem to think. My life philosophy was put to the test when trouble entered my world in the form of a coworker named Brian Randall. While I worked in climate control, Brian, a fellow employee in the receiving and shipping department, was everything I wasn't: tall, well-built, ruggedly handsome, and completely self-absorbed. He claimed to have played sports in college, and although those days were gone, he worked hard to maintain his physique and demeanor. In our workplace, Brian became the center of attention, with everyone hanging on his every word. People laughed at his jokes, men egged him on, and he shamelessly flirted with attractive women, regardless of their marital status. Despite my observations of Brian's behavior, I kept my distance and didn't want to make waves. Surprisingly, Brian decided to target me. It started with subtle insults about my height and size, and he even offered to fetch things for me from high places, all done in the presence of our colleagues, who laughed along. I became the subject of Brian's amusement, earning the nickname Baby Jerry in a seemingly condescending manner. Reflecting on the situation, I realized that my usual approach of staying composed and not creating problems had backfired. I felt a growing contempt for me in the office, and I sensed that any chances of a promotion were diminishing. Although I brushed it off initially, realizing that Brian was just having fun, I now understand that my reluctance to confront the issue only fueled his behavior. If I had filed a complaint, I doubted any consequences for Brian, and instead, I might have faced repercussions from my colleagues. Randall meant no harm, he simply lifted everyone's spirits. Regardless of whether I was mistaken or not, I never considered myself weak. I firmly believed that the threshold for taking action had not been crossed. Looking back, I might have played a part in setting the stage for the upcoming events, creating conditions for seeds to take root. This situation had been unfolding for several months when Brian decided to escalate matters. They handed me a package of important papers from another office, and as Brian noticed my name on it while passing the mail cart, he opted to deliver it himself. Without warning, he exclaimed, "Don't yawn, Jerry, special delivery." Before the substantial manila envelope, he crashed it onto my desk. When he landed, he knocked over a folding double photo frame that contained 2 photos, my wedding photo with Maureen and her posing on the beach on a balcony from our last vacation. Since he was closer to the fallen frame, he quickly grabbed it. Brian apologized insincerely with a malicious grin, straightening up to his full height with the photos in his hand. With a gesture more aggressive than anything I've done before, I tried to snatch the photos from him. However, Brian skillfully evaded my attempt and unfolded the photos to examine them with an approving smile. He commented, "Not bad, little Jerry. I can't imagine how you managed to keep her." This time, there was less levity and more genuine contempt in his tone. I couldn't force a smile after that, staring at another man's wife for too long, casually tossing the double frame onto the desk. Brian turned toward the door and instructed, "Send this to Philly to me so I can ride her a little." Someone as wild as she is will sooner or later throw you off. Damn, I'll do you a favor, he spat dispassionately over his shoulder. For the first time, something inside me began to tense up, but nothing significant happened afterward. Things between Brian and me remained quiet as they were before the company's annual summer picnic took place shortly after these events. While parking, I observed Marilyn checking her hair and makeup in the visor mirror. It was one of those moments when you fall in love with a person all over again. As we prepared to attend the picnic, Brian, the mountain of antics, arrived fashionably late, drawing a crowd around him. Men laughed at his senseless banter, but I managed to keep Marilyn and me at a comfortable distance while we chatted and enjoyed barbecue. However, I noticed my wife glancing curiously at the group from time to time. I was aware of the situation unfolding around me, sensing that my luck was running out. Brian strategically positioned himself near the drinks, and when it came time to restock, I found myself shuttling back and forth. Noticing Marilyn's clear hesitation to leave the drinks area, I almost breathed a sigh of relief when Brian intercepted us, calling out, "Hey, little Jerry." The remark about my secret beer drinking elicited laughter from our colleagues and unfamiliar guests. Although it wasn't a particularly clever joke, Brian approached, highlighting our noticeable height difference and joking about needing identification to let me take a drink. More laughter ensued, but this time, it was accompanied by another sound, my wife's laughter. Her usually angelic tone now sounded off, resembling a novice musician attempting to play the clarinet. I involuntarily glanced at her, realizing I wasn't the only one who caught that unusual sound. Despite my certainty that Brian had been more interested in my wife's dress than her laughter, he masterfully shifted his attention to Marilyn, pretending to notice her for the first time. "Hi, do I know you?" "You're that beautiful woman with great taste in swimwear," Brian grinned, and Marilyn surprisingly replied without much anger, rather, a smile played on her lips. A sharp pain pierced my heart, and I felt a surge of irritation that she easily believed a stranger's lie, especially when it contradicted my actions. The storm of emotions inside me intensified when Brian continued his harmless but false comment that I was showing off photos of my wife in swimsuits, and I couldn't even object. My wife's photos were in my office, and I didn't want anyone to look at them. I was trapped, denying it would only make me appear false and self-serving. My anger shifted towards Brian, who effortlessly manipulated those around him, including my wife. Despite wearing those metaphorical glasses, no one but me seemed to see him for who he truly was. His gaze was fixed on Marilyn, making me feel invisible, but his words were meant for both of us. He expressed a desire to invite her somewhere someday, and though there was awkward and scattered laughter, my wife seemed shocked yet amused. In that moment, my desire to enjoy the party vanished. I abandoned the beer, grabbing Marilyn's hand as I made my way out. She resisted briefly, but I interpreted it as a mini betrayal, letting go before she even started moving. As I walked away with determined but deliberate steps, I was vaguely aware of Marilyn, perhaps caught off guard by the sudden departure. The disappointment lingered, and I couldn't shake the feeling of lacking support where I needed it the most. Addressing the crowd with the usual excuses before joining me, Brian tried to defuse the situation by saying, "Hey, come on, Jerry, I was just joking. Don't be so serious, you know I'd never want to cross your path." This elicited more laughter, including Marilyn's, which started and then abruptly stopped. It struck me that for once, Brian might be questioning if he had gone too far, but that would require a level of self-criticism he lacked. Even if by some miracle he did possess it, his pride would likely prevent him from deviating from his usual behavior. Distancing myself, I sat on a picnic bench, gazing into space while Marilyn stood closely behind me, observing the unfolding drama on my face. I sensed a range of emotions within her, indignation towards me, embarrassment not for me but because of me, confusion about what to say, and perhaps even disappointment, disapproval, and contempt. How had Brian managed to set me up so swiftly and thoroughly in front of my own wife, who seemed oblivious to the situation? Finally, Marilyn spoke, asking if the demonstration was truly necessary. I looked at her incredulously, explaining that while Brian was rude, he was just kidding, as it seemed to be his usual demeanor. She then changed tactics, suggesting that if I didn't want guys hitting on my wife, I shouldn't showcase my product to coworkers. Frustrated, I bowed my head slightly and closed my eyes before shaking it a few times. Marilyn, however, misinterpreted my body language, suggesting that we sort things out and exchange apologies. She pointed back to where we came from. After a moment's contemplation, I declined, stating that I understood everything perfectly and my day was already ruined. Heading towards the car, I realized I had come alone, and looking back, I saw Marilyn at the drinks table in the distance. Suppressing my anger, I got into the car, started it, and sat for a while studying the manufacturer's emblem on the steering wheel. Though my anger didn't dissipate, I told myself to let it go, shifted the car into reverse, and prepared to drive. However, a knock on the passenger window interrupted me. Marilyn was there, expressing confusion with a what-the-hell gesture. I put the car back into park, unlocked the doors, and she climbed in, irritated, questioning my problem. Attempting to explain that she came to offer apologies and Mr. Randall had apologized too, she couldn't fathom my reaction. I retorted, expressing disbelief at her perspective, describing Mr. Randall as a world-class act. Despite the day's events, we rode home in silence, with her accusing me of acting like a child and insinuating that she had to babysit me. The evening passed without conversation, and afterward, our interactions were cool, routine discussions, small talk, and everyday matters devoid of any intimacy. My thoughts lingered on the incident, contemplating the fading reflection of a smile on her face that I observed during the ride home. I brooded over how swiftly our connection with her dissipated after that ill-fated picnic. The gloomy atmosphere lingered, becoming a constant presence. Despite not deserving Brian Randall in my life, I certainly didn't deserve my life partner siding with him. The following workday after the picnic, Brian attempted to publicly accept an apology I never offered. I barely caught the thinly veiled mockery, but now, for different reasons, I became guarded. For the first time, I resisted going with the flow and felt resentment. His comment was just tossed into the general pile, and I found my lifelong ingrained defense mechanism failing. Dealing with this was challenging, and the more I thought about my wife, the more distasteful it became. A man is expected to come to his senses and apologize after a few days, but I had nothing to apologize for. Earning Marilyn's forgiveness seemed impossible, and receiving an apology from her held no interest. I began scrutinizing her actions from a new perspective, questioning if she always had these habits I overlooked. Among the new questions, minor annoyances surfaced, things I undoubtedly knew before, but now they bothered me: her taste in music, the state of her car filled with disposable coffee cups. All these details suddenly became significant. However, these were merely reactions to her feelings toward me. I bet she thought she hid it well, but now I observed her closely. I noticed barely perceptible grimaces at my habits she disliked, feeling her contempt and even pity. Apologizing for something I didn't do wrong would probably worsen things. We fell out of love without a fight, and strangely, I wasn't sure if it bothered me that much. The thought tormented me more than the idea of losing her, especially considering I once believed Marilyn was out of my league. Weeks passed, and a calm settled in the office. Brian remained silent, but I caught glimpses of his wolfish grin when he thought I wasn't looking. My focus shifted to work, and colleagues avoided non-work-related conversations. Their discomfort and pitying glances fueled my growing resentment towards them. My boss subtly delegated challenging tasks, possibly influenced by rumors circulating after the picnic. However, I soon discovered that those looks held more than I initially thought. The final blow to my old life occurred in the men's room at the main lobby. Although I rarely used it, my withdrawal and resentment led me there, contemplating how everything was consuming me. I decided to indulge myself, realizing I hadn't done so in a long time. If Brian could enjoy long lunches, so could I. As I headed towards the main entrance, thoughts of an upscale steakhouse downtown crossed my mind. A trip to the toilet turned into an unexpected encounter as I overheard two guys, Kenneth and James, discussing their workplace dynamics and personal lives. The realization struck that adulthood sometimes eludes us even in professional settings. Hey, are you certain about ordering wings? We still have time to correct it, the guy whose name I believe was James remarked. I couldn't help but notice they had the same idea as me, but their concern was more about salary. Kenneth apparently replied with a laugh, stating that his wife would skin him if they made a mistake. Kenneth felt the need to clarify his statement, saying, "Hey, we can't all be Brian, not a damn thing like that. I still can't believe he's entertaining Jerry's wife. What did he say? Do you really think so? Is this arrogance even for him?" "Oh yes, he is," James responded. He mentioned that ever since right after the barbecue, Brian practically picked up Jerry's wife. Brian told him he would have her in his grasp by next week, planning to meet for lunch. He even speculated that Brian might be with her at this very moment as we spoke. When Kenneth asked if little Jerry knows, James shrugged it off, saying, "Who knows, dude, and who cares? What else could he do about it?" They shared a laugh, and although they blushed, at least they washed their hands. However, I awkwardly stood in the last stall for another 30 seconds without them noticing me. At this moment, I discovered that shock could exist without surprise. Unlike the guy who was here a minute ago, I had no doubt that what I overheard was true. It explained many things in my mind. Finishing my business on autopilot, I paid no attention to my reflection in the mirror as I washed my face. The only thought in my head was that I had lost my appetite when my car left the parking lot. I had no intention of heading downtown. Any doubts I might have had were dispelled when I saw Marilyn's car parked in front of the house and an SUV that presumably belonged to Randall. They didn't even attempt to conceal it. The neighbors were as aware as my colleagues. Dejectedly, I thought it was still strange for me to feel heartbroken about it. Perhaps it was, but the blue of hard AI was entirely replaced by the red anger of betrayal. As I approached the front door, I realized I wasn't afraid of Brian the Mountain. At that moment, my cognitive abilities were consumed by thoughts of retribution. I had heard the expression red veil before, and now I understood it perfectly. It was as if a red filter of hatred had been placed over my vision. The sounds could be heard through the door, and as soon as I opened it, the unmistakable noise of rough intimacy reached my ears. There was a short walk along the carpet to visually confirm the reality of my marriage. They were both completely naked, opting not to rush into quick intimacy. I stood by the door, mostly behind them but at a sufficient angle to see their silhouettes. I decided to retreat to the wall next to the doorway, out of sight. I was still furious, but strangely enough, seeing them with my own eyes brought me down a little. I didn't intend to confront them immediately. I needed to weigh my options. Somewhere from the depths of my psyche, my old self resurfaced, advising me to wait and not do anything impulsive. However, the new self quickly silenced the old one. "You've stayed away from this your whole life. Look where it has led you. You are a pathetic boy with an unfaithful wife, no matter what you tell yourself," I started to think. I glanced into the bedroom for a second, my gaze falling on the back of Brian's head. Although furious with my wife, I couldn't ignore the fact that he was the one who initiated it all. Marilyn made the decision to cheat, but Brian had been pushing for it. It had to be answered in a way that would make him regret his arrogance. Despite my fury, I wasn't foolish enough to challenge him physically, as he would likely put me in a coma. My wife would probably laugh, then tell the cops that I was the aggressor. I found myself in a situation where physical confrontation with Brian Randall seemed inevitable. Even though I entertained the thought of hitting him, I hesitated, considering the potential repercussions. The idea of using a weapon crossed my mind, perhaps a baseball bat or a crowbar from my garage. However, I questioned the effectiveness, knowing that Brian, nicknamed the Mountain, could possibly recover quickly from a physical assault. Contemplating the consequences, the thought of murder briefly crossed my mind, driven by the intense emotions of the moment. Despite these dark musings, I was resolute in not wanting Brian Randall to lose his life that day. Instead, I desired him to feel remorse for humiliating me, extending the consequences over a long period. In a crucial moment, a realization struck me. It wasn't just about me seeking revenge. Brian Randall had a substantial karmic debt, and the time for him to face the consequences had arrived. Feeling justified, I considered myself an instrument of justice, aiming to balance the cosmic scales. Given that I was physically inferior, I recognized the need to outsmart my adversary, Brian, who took advantage of the manipulation in my marriage. He posed a challenge. I had to resort to driving him to madness rather than engaging in physical combat or relying on wit alone. As I reflected on my life, realizing how Brian had exploited the dynamics of my marriage, I decided it was time for a drastic change. Brian had been having an affair with my wife, and it was time for a sharp turnaround. Despite the chaos in my thoughts, I methodically proceeded to execute my plan quietly. I went downstairs, ensuring not to attract attention. In the garage, I retrieved a can of WD-40, a trusty tool in my possession. Returning inside, I prepared for the moment by going to the decorative fireplace, where Marilyn kept scented candles, and grabbed the lighter. With everything set, I sneaked back into the bedroom. Approaching Brian, I observed his oblivious state and seized the opportunity. He appeared macho, with a distinct lack of grooming. As I was about to act, Brian's reactions intensified, providing the perfect moment. I chuckled, feeling a stroke of luck, and prepared to unleash my plan. I noticed Brian's grunts becoming louder, and his frantic movements added to the perfect scenario. With satisfaction, I realized that fate had delivered my enemy into my hands. Brian's natural macho demeanor soon faced an unexpected turn of events as I executed my plan. The unexpected sensation of oil running down his back and the pungent aroma of the lubricant confused him swiftly. I ignited the oil with a lighter, catching Brian by surprise. The situation quickly escalated as he turned into a human torch, his screams echoing in the room. Evading his attempts to retaliate, I maneuvered in the bedroom.